Hey Evelyn and Sumaya, you're both live.
Yep, just going through the process right now.
Okay, perfect. Hi, Evelyn. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Samaya?
I'm wonderful, and I'm so excited that we have this presentation that we're doing today.
I'm
Uh,
excited to be doing it with you. Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome everybody to this web webinar. We're talking about all things citizenship for both Canada and the US. And as we get started, I'm just going to share the deck so you have it, and we'll get started. And feel free to provide us with any feedback you can provide us with. We would love to hear from you. So please give me 1 second.
okay, perfect. I'm very excited. I think we have some great information for people today that hopefully will be really, really helpful.
Yeah, of course, when you do everything right and then something goes wrong, this is always the case. No, it's not working. 1 sec. Because
Well, that's technology.
it is technology. Yeah, we have to keep going. So 1 second.
No worries.
Justine, it's not sharing in the page that's supposed to share. So that's a problem. It was
Can you?
all lined
Mhm.
up and now it's not there anymore. So that's my issue. So I'm going to stop sharing if I can and try it again. Can you stop it on your end?
No, it's actually not showing my end.
Okay, yeah, because everything was here. And now as soon as I went to my page, it wasn't there anymore because of the Zoom page. So I'm just going to stop and then we'll try it again. My apologies, everybody, but this is technology sometimes. So I'm going to go back to us and then see if we can do that.
Oh, there we go. It looks like the screen is sharing. Perfect. Okay.
And then, do you see us now or do you see
Yeah,
the deck?
I see the presentation. It's here
Do
now.
you?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, because it wasn't reflected before, as long as you
Yeah.
see it. All right,
Sometimes
so
it
sorry
takes some
about that bump.
Perfect.
So we're talking today about where citizenship gets complicated, and it's about US and Canadian law further explained by myself and Sumaiya. I'm so excited to do this with you. So let us get going. All right. So this presentation is for,
Wait, just one moment. It looks like we
oh my
lost the
God,
screen for 1 second. Let's just see.
never seen this happen before.
Okay, here we go.
But I tried to move. There we go.
Okay, there we go.
Don't touch anything. I'm sorry for everybody. So this webinar is for you if you have ties to the United States or Canada. If you're planning to move, work, or expand across borders, and you want to know what it means for you in terms of your citizenship that you currently hold or want to hold. And if you have children born abroad or you're planning to have children born abroad, you need to think about what citizenship you're passing down or that they're earning and gaining by way of birth. Or if you are unsecure about your citizenship status in any way, we want this to be valuable information for you so that you get as much information as you need. And feel free to reach out to me and Sumaiya after for all your questions. Sumaiya?
Okay, perfect. So today what we're going to cover is we're going to give you the basics of how citizenship works in both countries. So you have an idea of both Canadian law and US law. And we're also going to go over where people get it wrong, some misconceptions and things that they may not be aware of, and we'll address them. We're also going to go over recent updates that you need to know and what this means for you and your family if you're a US citizen or a Canadian citizen, or maybe you have both US and Canadian citizenship. And what I want to emphasize over here is that we won't be giving legal advice. We will be sharing important information. And as Evelyn stated, for anything that pertains to your situation where you need specific legal advice, you can always reach out to us directly.
Absolutely. So these
So
are your hosts, Sumaiya.
let me introduce my colleague, Evelyn Ackah. Evelyn is an amazing immigration attorney. She's the founder and managing lawyer of Ackah Business Immigration Law. It's based in Calgary, Alberta, and she has satellite offices in Vancouver and Toronto. Evelyn has been doing immigration law for 25 years. So that is a very, very long time, and she focuses exclusively in the area of Canadian and cross cross-border NAFTA U.S. immigration law. She and her team, they provide expert advice, immigration advice, and represent corporations and individuals in the development and implementation of immigration strategies. So, Evelyn, we're so excited.
Thank you so much. Let me introduce you to my lovely guest and co-host with me, Sumaiya Khalique. Sumaiya is a U.S. immigration attorney, and she's the founder of Khalique Law, PLLC, a New York-based law firm. She advises founders and professionals and families on extraordinary ability, business immigration, and long-term strategy. Her work is shaped by her own experience as an immigrant to the United States. Her services include O1, EB1, NIW, H-1Bs and L-1 visas, as well as marriage-based green cards and adjustment of status, and U.S. citizenship and naturalization. With over 13 years of experience, including in removal defense, she takes a strategy-driven, hands-on approach to every case she does with her incredible team at Khalique Law. All right. So why does citizenship get confusing? This is what we're here to talk about because many people ask us questions on a regular basis about, am I a citizen? How do I get it? Did I lose it? What's going on? So we thought this presentation would be really useful to be able to give you a high-level overview of why citizenship is more complicated than you think it is, and why you need to be, working with professionals such as ourselves, because there are different legal systems, different rules for children, different residency requirements, as well as cross-border activity. If you are somebody who is traveling regularly, that also adds another layer of confusion and complexity to your situation. So we want this to be useful and practical information for you today.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. And the other thing too is there are a lot of misconceptions about citizenship. Sometimes people think that their child is automatically a U.S. citizen, depending on where they're born. They may be automatically a U.S. citizen, even if they're not born outside of the United States, but there needs to be some clarification about this. And I'm sure there are clarifications with Canadian law as well we need to address. And sometimes people think that if you're physically in Canada or the United States, you may automatically be a U.S. citizen, and they may not be aware that there are other things that they have to meet in order to become a citizen. And people also think that sometimes becoming a citizen of more than one country, it has only benefits, but there could also be some responsibilities and obligations that you're not aware of. And then this is the most important. A lot of times people think citizenship rules are the same in every country or similar, but that's not always the case. So today we're going to go over various misconceptions that apply to citizenship in general, and then also to US and Canadian law.
Perfect. All right, you're up.
All right, let's talk about being a U.S. citizen. I recently had somebody that we were doing a visa for, and they told me that someone thought that meant they were automatically applying for citizenship. That is not the case. So the first thing that you have to know is birthright citizenship comes from the 14th Amendment. And this is very important right now. We'll discuss this a bit later, but that's where the right to U.S. citizenship comes from if you are born in the United States. Citizenship can be derived through your parents, and it can also be derived if you were born over here. I'm a little reluctant to keep this, the thing with this, Evelyn, is that it's hard to keep it simple because there's complex. So I'm struggling to state that citizenship is just derived through parents, because that can be complex. But let's just leave it at that. You can get it through your parents. There's also a naturalization process that you can undergo if you weren't born to U.S. citizens or weren't born in the United States, through which you could become a U.S. citizen. And then there are also the regular naturalization requirements that you have to meet in order to be a U.S. citizen. So basically, you have to have a green card, you have to have residency and physical presence, you have to have good moral character, civics, and English test. So as you can see in my struggle to go over the basics, it's hard to just say that these are the basics, and we'll address more of this in the next upcoming slides.
Absolutely. That sounds great. It's a good place to start. So in terms of Canada and our citizenship basics, we do have a birthright citizenship, of course, but there are exceptions as well. So for instance, if you have a child born in Canada, yes, that child becomes a Canadian citizen. The child is not able to pass citizenship on to parents by way of their birth. A lot of times people will apply for humanitarian and compassionate applications for permanent residence as the parents because they can say, I have a child born in Canada and we want to stay in case they're not able to maintain their status for whatever reason. That is something that is compelling in terms of the best interest of the child, but it's not guaranteed that you have a Canadian child that you will get permanent residence and eventually citizenship. There's also citizenship by descent, and this is something that has gone through major changes as of December of 2025. So I'll talk about that later because it is brand spanking new and everybody is calling us about how to become a Canadian citizen. There is also our process similar in the United States where you can naturalize from being a permanent resident to a citizen. And that means that you have spent enough time in Canada physically. You cannot obtain citizenship under the naturalization process by being absent from Canada. You must have spent that 1,095 days of full physical presence in Canada, which is about 3 years, so that you can obtain citizenship. And we also have a language requirement and a knowledge test, and you must have filed all your taxes for the 5 years prior to show that you're contributing and doing everything right. I will be expanding on the citizenship by descent because that is a major change that may impact you, and you may have rights to Canada as a citizen that you didn't know about. So we'll speak more about that after the basics are covered. Okay, thank you. All right. So some recent updates. Do you want to go, Sumaiya, and tell us what is happening, especially the political stuff that's happening, which is also affecting everything?
Yeah. So I think just some more information for people to know regarding being a citizenship. And this came to mind when you were sharing the Canadian requirements. So in the US, you have to be a permanent resident. And generally, it's 5 years of permanent residency before you can apply for a US citizenship. And if you're married to a US citizen, then there's a benefit and you can apply within 3 years of having that green card or that permanent residency. And that's very, very important. So in the past, this was one of the concrete requirements, in addition to good moral character, living in the same state for at least 3 months. And just like Canadian law, you have to also have the physical presence, right? So half of that 5 years, about 30 months, you have to be in the United States. If it's 3 years based on marriage to a US citizen, it's half of that time, so about 18 months. So these were the key requirements. And as long as you met these, you didn't have a criminal record that prevented you from being eligible for citizenship, you paid your taxes, you met all of these requirements, you could essentially apply for citizenship. And I want to just caveat this with that, of course, good moral character, if you have a criminal history, it can get a bit more complex. What I want to address here today is the general update of good moral character requirement, how it impacts everyone, regardless of whether they have a criminal background or not. So there have been some changes in US citizenship law and also the naturalization process last year. The first thing is that now US citizenship, when you're applying for naturalization, there is a much more emphasis on establishing good moral character. So USCIS officers, when you're going in for an interview, they are looking at criteria that they weren't looking at in such depth prior to last year. So they're going to be looking at your community ties, paying taxes, child support, in addition to your criminal record, to see if you really are a person of good moral character. They're really heavily scrutinizing this. So this is something new. So although the requirement existed before, the actual implementation of it and how things are being adjudicated, it is a lot more strict right now. So this is something that we tell people you have to take seriously. So in practice, how this is coming up is you go into interviews, USCIS officers are asking in-depth questions. And good moral character can also encompass looking back at how you got your green card, right? Did you misrepresent something important? Did you not share something in your application that you should have shared? So this is something very, very important that people should take very seriously in regards to applying for citizenship. Being very forthcoming and then having an attorney really evaluate how you got that green card, past processes, etc., so it doesn't affect your eligibility. The other thing that's an update is for the first time in years that they updated the tests last year. So now instead of 100 questions, there are 128 questions that you have to learn from, as if 100 wasn't difficult enough. Now there's 128 and you have to get 12 out of 20 correct instead of 6 out of 10. And this is a new regulation, new change that has been implemented and will be applied to everyone who applied for citizenship after August of last year. So that's very, very important if you're applying right now. Make sure you're studying from the actual test. The 128 questions. And then again, in practice, what we're seeing is that it is not enough to just memorize all the answers. USCIS officers are really checking to see if you understand English. So before you could go in, you can memorize the answers, you can memorize all the yes, no's to the security questions, but now they are checking to see if you can understand English by asking you general questions, asking for definitions, etc. So that's an important one that people should keep in mind. Okay, so now we're going to go into birthright citizenship. This is the most important thing that is going on, and one of the most important things that is going on regarding citizenship in the United States. In an ongoing Supreme Court case, Barbara B. Trump, the United States is really engaging with the question of whether we are going to change a fundamental law about who can become a US citizen. So under the 14th Amendment, anyone that is born in the United States can be a US citizen because they are considered under the jurisdiction of the United States. So it doesn't matter if your parents were US citizens or not. It doesn't matter if they were green card holders. As long as you were born in the United States, you could become a US citizen. But now, and recently the Supreme Court heard arguments about this, and we will get a decision in the summer. This is being contested. We have the government saying that this can no longer be the basis for deriving citizenship because people can be born here, but that doesn't mean that they have allegiance to the United States. So this is one of the arguments that's being made. And they want to change it so that you have to have at least one US citizen parent or a green card holder, somebody who has some basis, permanent basis to be here. And essentially, this is going to impact people who are born here. Let's say they come here and their parents aren't green card holders, they don't have citizenship, they don't have status, or someone who's temporarily visiting here. It's saying that all of these people, even if they're physically born here, may not be a US citizen. And I think, Evelyn, this is something huge, not just in the impact that it has on people, but also overturning a really important amendment in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So tell me about processing times. Have anything changed?
So processing times have definitely been impacted to some extent. In the last year or so, we were getting citizenship interviews, I would say, as quickly as 3 months, 3 to 5. What we're seeing right now is that some interviews are taking longer. For the most part, the average is about the same, 3 to 5, but there are some where it's taking up to a year. So there could be longer processing times for US citizenship. The other thing, too, that we're seeing is I'm going into these interviews with people and they're not passing their tests. So they are learning. So in the past, right, the emphasis was on studying for the civics test. You learn the questions and then people didn't really worry so much about the reading and writing. But right now, that is a critical factor in passing your citizenship test. I mean, it was always a requirement, but in the last interview I attended, the USCIS officer had my client take multiple writing tests.
Oh my God.
And her spelling was off, and that really impacted her. So I think that one of the processing trends that we're seeing is the adjudication of these citizenship applications. They're applying much higher standards. For people to demonstrate that they are eligible for citizenship, they know the history, they speak English, and they can read and write. But I will say that even with all of these changes and things that are going on, at least the applications, when we're getting them filed, they're getting put into the system. So that's at least something positive. But yeah, that's at least something positive. But definitely what I want to emphasize is that you cannot take this lightly when you apply for citizenship. You have to make sure you meet all of the requirements and you're really, really prepared for that interview. It's not enough to study. You have to make sure you understand English and can engage with the officer.
Okay. No, that's really good information, Sumaiya. Wow. Well, it sounds like Canada, just like US, is going through lots of changes.
Yeah, tell us what's going on in Canada.
It has been crazy. So before December 2025, we had the first generation limit. And that's the rule that says that if you were born to a Canadian outside of Canada, you were considered to be you could apply for citizenship. So you would register the birth abroad and
Yeah.
get your child a passport. But that person, that child that was born outside of the US to Canadian parents, could not pass that down to the second generation. That has been something in law probably
Yeah.
for about the last 15, 18 years. And just like in the States, the laws change almost every generation. There's a change, right? So
Yeah.
this was what it was for the last 18 years. And then because of a case law that, somebody took it all the way to fight it at the Ontario Court of Appeal, decision came down in December. And basically that law changed the first generation limit to remove it completely. And
Wow.
so it's amazing. It used to be that
Yeah.
a parent can only pass citizenship to that first child, but that child couldn't pass it along to, let's say, the grandparents,
Right.
that second generation. Now they can pass it down unlimited generations.
Yeah.
And so it's just happened in December. And so we're seeing a lot of people, especially a lot of Americans for obvious reasons, looking
of
for
course.
maybe looking
Yeah.
at having options and having a second passport and a Canadian passport, which is very valuable to them if they were to give up their US passport at some point or carry both, which you're entitled to do in Canada. People always ask, will I have to give up my US if I get a Canadian citizenship or passport? You do not. You can have
Yeah.
both. The only issue is the US doesn't recognize it. So, you come in with your US passport, and
Yeah.
in Canada, the same. You come in with your Canadian passport. You can have 5 passports. They don't care.
Right.
But in
Right.
terms of this piece, it's a major shift because it has
Yeah.
changed everything about citizenship law. And I'm now working with people who are looking back to 1867 when
Yeah.
Canada was
Wow.
created.
Yeah. Yeah.
We started working with a genealogist even
Yeah.
to help our clients find their history. If they think, hey, I have family from Quebec,
Yeah.
and we moved from France, we moved from the UK when in 1890. And if they can find evidence of that Canadian citizen, whether acquired it or was born in Canada, they can go all the way back and trace their ancestry to themselves. They can apply for Canadian citizenship. It is unbelievable.
So what changed that they became open to this? Because before it was just a limit on what
Yeah, I think it was the case that they were going to lose
Yeah.
it based on they felt like they were breaching charter rights, Canadian
Okay.
Charter of Rights and Freedoms,
Yeah.
and they felt that it was discriminatory. And
Mm.
so currently that is the law. However, I keep telling everybody, I can see the government trying to come up with limits.
I see.
So this is
Right.
the
Right.
period now where it is open and we're
Yeah.
all putting in all applications, all the lawyers across the country. We're doing lots
Yeah.
of applications. Like the volume is crazy
Yeah.
because this is the time. And because
Yeah.
there are no guidelines, there are no regulations, nothing has come out because you can
Yeah.
tell we're a little busy
Right.
now
Right.
dealing with,
Yeah.
President Trump and treaties and
Right.
NAFTA and
Right.
other things
It's
like
over.
that.
Yeah.
Nobody has put time into it at the
Yeah.
moment. So the other thing that's really important about this change is that going forward, it won't be as easy to get. So from
Mm.
December, you must have a new substantial connection test. And that
Okay.
basically means that you must, to pass citizenship fast. So let's say you are 8th generation and you're able to get it and you're American.
Mm-hmm.
Now you want to pass it on to your child. You, American, who's also now got Canadian citizenship, has
Yeah.
to be in Canada. You have
Yeah.
to show that you are actually spending 3 years of physical
Mm.
presence. So it's
Okay.
not going to be this
Yeah.
haphazard
Right.
forever,
Right.
nobody lives
Yeah.
in Canada. You
Yeah.
still have to be able to show going forward since December 2025, if you
Right.
get citizenship, that you want to pass it down, you have to live in Canada for 3 years, physical
Yeah.
presence
Yeah.
before your child's birth.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can pass that on, even if you have a child in the US later or somewhere else in the world. So
Okay.
that's the real new law
Yeah.
around the substantial connection. They want people to actually be Canadians and not just a
Right.
name
Right. Right.
only or by passport.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal.
So is this
Yeah.
something that was recently the substantial test implemented?
That was all a part of that change in December with the
I
case
see.
law. When they
Yeah.
announced it, they said basically there are a number of something called lost Canadians as well, where people for years thought they were Canadians living in
Right, right.
Canada, but
Yeah,
they
yeah,
might have just crossed the border and lived
right.
in a border town,
Yeah,
and for 50 years thought they were Canadian and found out
yeah,
they weren't. So the government was bringing those people into the fold and saying, clearly you're Canadian. You've been living here for 30, 40, 50 years, and you just thought you were and you didn't get a passport and you were actually
right, right.
American. So that
Yeah.
covered those lost Canadians. It
Uh-huh.
covered those with the generational limit, the first
Yeah,
generation limit. And now they can, if it's important to them, this is their
yeah,
window. So we're
yeah.
saying do it now because we don't know at the end of the year if it's going to be the same or if it's going to
Mhm.
change.
Right,
And
right.
then that piece around being able to make sure you live in Canada at
Yeah,
least for years if you're going to have a child abroad so that you can pass it. Otherwise, you're going to lose that. So
yeah,
these are some major developments. And I
yeah,
can tell you,
yeah,
we have people calling us. I'm doing consultations every day to
yeah.
Americans who are looking at options just to have another passport, just in
Right.
case. And
Yeah,
so that's one of the major changes that has happened right now. And I
yeah,
tell everybody too, we don't know what's going to happen. So I'm
yeah,
saying get it in. And I'm telling everybody
yeah.
it's 50-50 because I
Right.
have no regulations. I have no
Yeah,
guidelines. I have no nothing
yeah,
except if you can show, birth certificates, death certificates, census records, anything that ties your family member to Canada, and then you can go up the chain to you, you should apply.
yeah,
Because right now, getting in means you'll be in under the law as it is now. So
yeah,
even if things change in 6 months, a year from now, again, if the government tries to take another stab at creating limits, you're already in
yeah,
at the time that the law was, and they won't be able to toss it out. So it's
yeah,
very important sometimes just to get the application in.
yeah.
So those are major changes that affected us
Mhm.
right now. And
Yeah,
so thanks to that court and the bill C3 is the new bill and
yeah,
the court case, this is what has affected things. And unfortunately, but the result of that is processing timelines.
yeah.
To get citizenship used to be like 6 to 8 months. Now we're looking at a year to year and a half. So
Okay, that's a long time. Yeah,
I can't even tell people today, like, if it's going to be approved. That's why I say it's 50-50. And I need people to know that if you think it's important to you, do it now. But
yeah.
we won't know for a year or a year and a half how they're treating
Mhm.
every case. And so
Yeah,
we have to put the best foot forward. And that's why working with a lawyer who understands the case to be made, understands what you need to prove. And now, as I said, we even have a genealogist as a
yeah,
contractor
yeah.
helping people because that's not our job as
Right,
immigration
right,
lawyers.
right. Yeah,
But
yeah.
they are so serious about going back into their family history to find the records they need to apply that now they're engaging with this separate genealogist to help them. So that's the world of immigration right now in
Right, right.
Canada.
Yeah.
Never
I mean,
boring.
yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And, you said something very interesting, which resonates with me and with US immigration law and citizenship law. You said that right now, this is what the law is, right? And it could change.
Yes.
And I think that's very interesting because in the United States, you can get citizenship by going back various generations, right? By
Yes.
showing that you had somebody in your family directly, your parents, your grandparents, great grandparents, et cetera, whatnot,
Mhm.
and demonstrating that. But depending on when you were born, there are different laws that
Yes.
apply. So either it's like, through your parents, both parents being citizens, or one parent being a citizen and the other not. And then also, just like in Canada, there are physical presence requirements. And I think that's a key part, right? Like
Mhm.
the parent that you're claiming the tie through in the United States, depending on when you're born, for one category of people, the parent has to have lived in the United States for at least like 5 years. And
Yeah,
I think it's like after the age of 14. So there are different rules depending on when you're born. And I think
exactly.
you're right. Like in Canada right now, they have this test, but by the end of the year, they could have another test because
Yeah.
they're
It
right.
changes. Like I always say, every generation, like just like you, I know in the US when I've worked with attorneys, they have to go back and look at all this. There's
Right.
a table, it tells you what the
Oh my
law was,
gosh.
how,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's
yeah.
kind of how it was for us, because it was
Right.
every 20 years something
Yeah.
changes. So right
Right.
now, it is what it is. And
Yeah.
I think Canada is just saying we are an aging population. We
Right.
are a small population relative to our huge, geographic size. And so why not? If people
Right.
want
Right.
to come and live here, we're
Yeah.
happy to have them so
Yeah.
long as they're
Yeah.
citizens. you know?
Evelyn,
Yeah.
Evelyn, oh my gosh,
Yes.
I'm having like a brain movement. Evelyn, I have a question for you before we
Yeah.
move on.
Sure.
So physical presence, you said under this new law, people have to show 3 years.
Yes.
For us, somebody has to have 5 years or the three if married to a US citizen to be eligible for naturalization. What's
Mhm.
the physical presence requirement for Canadians?
Yeah, it means so most people get
Yeah,
citizenship by way of permanent residence first. So they
yeah,
get permanent residence and
yeah.
then they have to be a permanent resident for 3 years
Okay,
physically in Canada for that
okay,
1,095 days
okay.
before they can apply for Canadian citizenship. That's the normal
Right.
process. You
So
know,
it doesn't matter. There's like no different
there's no difference.
if they're married to
Yeah.
a Canadian
No,
citizen.
it doesn't help you. The only thing
Oh,
is, if you are a permanent resident and let's say
yeah,
you go abroad and your work transfers you, or you're traveling and you're living abroad with a Canadian citizen, you are
yeah.
able to maintain your permanent residence
Okay.
because you're with a Canadian
Um,
citizen, but you cannot obtain citizenship. That's why
yeah,
everybody gets confused. You
yeah.
cannot obtain citizenship without the physical presence. You can
Okay.
maintain your PR
Yeah.
forever. Every
Right,
five
right,
years, renew it and say, I'm still with my Canadian husband. We live in
right.
Belize and you can maintain
Yeah,
it, but you can't get citizenship if you don't spend those 3 years out
right.
of 5 physically in Canada. So most people, I always say, just get it, get your
Yeah,
citizenship. Then
yeah,
you can
yeah.
go and do whatever you want after
Right,
that
right.
if
Yeah,
it's important to you to have that passport. But if it's not, and you're just with your Canadian citizen, and assuming you don't separate or get divorced,
yeah,
right? Or
yeah,
if your employer in Canada transfers you and you can prove this is a work-related business reason for you to be out of the country, you can
yeah.
maintain PR on that basis, but you
Mm,
can never earn or gain citizenship
mm.
without the physical presence.
Okay, that's very interesting to know that you can maintain it if you're with somebody
Yes.
who's a Canadian. We cannot do that in the United States.
Really?
Yeah, if you're outside of the country, that counts as outside of the country. That is
Oh,
not part of the calculation. So we have had clients where we literally had to calculate and wait for them to
yes.
meet the requirement before they could do that.
Yeah.
It's fascinating what the differences are between
It's a lot of
yeah,
numbers and
yeah,
dates, you know,
lot
like,
of nuances.
yeah,
I have
yeah,
one more question for you. So for us,
sure.
um, even if, so let's say the 5 year requirement, there are limitations to your traveling, right? So if
Yes.
somebody travels outside of the United States for more than a year,
Oh,
without permission, then it can impact the calculation of their physical presence. Do you have something like that in Canada
for citizenship or for PR?
for citizenship when they're applying for citizenship?
No, I mean, the thing is, when you apply for citizenship, as long as you meet the 1,095 days, you can literally meet it. We always say give yourself a couple
Yeah,
weeks
yeah,
leeway.
yeah.
You can apply and then go.
Yeah. Okay, okay, that's nice because for us it restarts the calculation.
Oh my
So
God.
there are all these like nuances that people are not
Yeah.
aware of. And then if you leave with permission and come back, there's like 4 day and a year. Like there are all these like little rules
No, no.
that we
Is
have to
it like the
factor.
US reentry permit you're talking about?
Yeah, reentry permit.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
don't have that. I mean,
yeah,
for PR, as I said, as long as you meet 2 years out of 5,
yeah,
physical presence in Canada. So in that 5 years, you spend 2 years, you can maintain your permanent resident status and renew your PR card. But if you don't meet the 3 years physical
yeah.
presence, you won't be eligible to apply for citizenship.
Okay.
So we
Yeah,
always try to tell people,
yeah,
like, sometimes you'll find a family where the dad is doing business abroad and he'll be
right.
the one that doesn't get citizenship and the whole family gets it.
Yeah,
They're staying.
right.
And that's the reality. Those are decisions people make. But we
Mhm.
don't need to get permission for that at all from
Okay,
anyone.
that's good. See, we're
Yeah.
already seeing here how there's so many nuances in between our countries, and like we're right next to each other.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this. It's so
Yes.
different. So why don't you talk about children and the rules around children?
Sure. So there are a variety of different rules for people if you are born to US citizen parents or one US citizen parents. And then also if a parent of yours becomes a US citizen, they naturalize. So if somebody is born overseas to US citizen parents, they can apply for something called a consular birth abroad, right? Get a certificate for that. Sometimes what happens is that people are born to US citizens and they don't know for years that they are eligible for US citizenship. And we've had this happen. We had somebody come to me, she was in her 20s, and she had a US citizen mom and a non-US citizen dad. We were doing all the different assessments for her to apply for a business visa. And then we're like, hold on, you have a US citizen mom. She was born here. How long did she live in the United States? So depending on when this client was born, this is how it works. If you're born to a parent who's a US citizen, or two parents, we pull out the charts.
Yeah.
We look at when you were born because there are different laws. And then depending on when you were born, we next look at if you have your mom or your dad who's a US citizen, if it's both parents or one parent, and then we look to see if they were married or not married.
Yeah.
Based on all of these things, we then determine if you meet the law at that time for becoming a US citizen. So, Evelyn, this is very complicated because there are several laws. So, we're not going to go into all of the details. What's important for a person to know is if you do have one parent that was a US citizen, or if you had a grandparent or a great-grandparent that was a US citizen at some time, we can go back and trace it using the law at that time of that relative's birth, right? And see if they were a US citizen and then trace it back to you to see if you are eligible for US citizen, if you derived it or acquired it through this, ancestor that you had. So anyone who has in the past had a grandparent, great-grandparents, or somebody in addition to a parent, it is worth it to consult with an immigration attorney so we could do this complex analysis to see if you're eligible.
Okay,
And
can I
just like-
ask you a question,
Yeah.
Sumaiya? I have some clients in the past, and people reach out to me saying,
Yeah.
my grandfather was American, but they're living in Canada. And, or one of them, let's say that one, his father lives in the States, and he's now sponsoring him, and it's taking like 10 years. Is that typical? So the father, even if it's an adult, let's say
Yeah.
the father is 75 and his son is 50, and the son is a Canadian citizen.
Yeah.
They're able to sponsor no matter what. There's no age limitation.
So these are, I think, two different questions.
Okay.
So a US citizen parent can always sponsor for their child, right?
No
And
matter how old.
yeah, and so it depends on their age. So there are different laws that apply depending on if they're over 21, under 21, if they're
Okay.
married, non-married. So this is when you're petitioning for a child, right?
Yes.
This is different than if somebody is automatically saying, they're saying to USCIS that we automatically either acquired at birth or we derive citizenship through our parent. So
Okay.
let's say if a parent becomes a US citizen and the child is under 18 at that time, right? And they're lawful permanent resident, then they can automatically just get citizenship. They don't have to naturalize.
Perfect.
Or if somebody was born, like they are born at the time that they were born, their parent was already a US citizen, one of them, then we look to see, does that parent meet the physical presence requirements? Do they meet the law at that time that the parent was born and this person was born in? And then they could have derived that at birth, right? Or like acquired that at birth. So there's a distinction of automatically getting your citizenship because you were born to a parent who's already a US citizen when you were born versus your parent naturalizes and you are a certain age when they naturalize, and then they don't have to do a child petition. You can just apply to get your certificate of citizenship. This is completely different than a parent petitioning to bring you in because you don't meet the age requirement. Like they didn't become a citizen when you were still eligible to apply for that. So there are various laws here and it's very nuanced. I think this is where it gets complicated for people because they don't realize that in one instant, the parent petitions as a child petition for that child to come in. In another instance, the child becomes is eligible for citizenship because they're at a certain age when their parent becomes a US citizen and they can directly get a certificate of citizenship and a passport. And then you have that other instance when at the time they are born, they're already eligible for US citizenship.
Got it.
They do that consular birth abroad, or they apply directly for a passport, US passport, and just show that they got it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Interesting.
Yeah.
Is there anything on the derivation after naturalization or that you want to touch
Yeah,
base?
so I just overlapped with that. So this is like you can derive citizenship through your parent, right? So
Yeah.
let's say your parent becomes a US citizen when you're under the age of 18, you're a green card holder and you live with them. If you can show all of these requirements, that instead of you applying for naturalization, when you become older, you can apply for something called a certificate of citizenship. So essentially the certificate of citizenship is confirmation that you have met the requirements to be a citizen because you derived that through your parents. And so that's something that is very particular, right? Because there's
Oh.
a requirement where you have to be a green card holder, right? You have to be at a certain age and you have to have lived with that parent.
Mhm.
And that living with that parent is very important. So this is different than, let's say, if you were born. You don't need to have a green card. You don't need any of those things. You just
Yeah.
say, at the time that I was born, I was already a US citizen because of my parents or my
And you're
grand.
just claiming it. Wow. This is
Yeah.
very interesting. So I want to talk to you later about some more questions I have on that because
Yeah,
it's
it's
so
very
interesting.
complicated. Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
no,
and
it's just
yeah, and Evelyn, I've been doing this for so many years,
yeah,
and each time somebody comes to me, I still have to sit there,
of
pull up
course.
the charts, look at it, think about it, because there's so many little
Yeah, but
things
that's
that we
good
have to check
lawyering. You're not
off.
just
Yeah,
making it up and just
yeah.
guesstimating. You
Of
have to always
course.
go back to that
Yeah.
table.
Right.
And for us too, I go back and look at what was the law at the time. So in terms of Canada, like they're just like in the States, there are people who will just come and have a baby in Canada
Yeah,
and then go back to their home country.
yeah.
As I said, yes, the child is Canadian. If you have a child born in Canada, then you are eligible to apply for that child for citizenship. They're already citizens by birth, and you can get them a passport. But that does not give the parent any citizenship rights
Yeah.
whatsoever. So we always need to, help people understand that if they're looking at ChatGPT for their legal advice,
Right.
I always say, please don't do that because it's wrong. And
Yeah,
that's why you come to professionals like
right.
Sumaiya and myself, because
Yeah.
it's so nuanced. So
Right.
yes, you can get citizenship by descent, meaning now, as I was talking about the changes in the laws. So if you are born to a Canadian citizen,
Yeah.
you can do that anywhere in the world if it's the first generation. Now it has changed. And
Right.
so now it is wide open, but it's wide open only as of those that were born before December 2025. So
Mm.
people need to know that means that's why everybody, even like
Yeah.
grandparents, are applying for their
Yeah.
children and their grandchildren right now because it's open to all of them. But
Yeah.
for people that are born after December 2025, they are subject to the fact that their parent has to have lived in Canada. So it's
Mm.
not going to be so easy to pass it
Right.
down now. They have to have that 3 years of physical presence while the parent was a citizen and then maybe moved and then had a kid abroad and
Yeah.
then you can pass that down. But if
Mm.
the parent never lived, so for
Yeah.
instance, some of these families who are doing like 7 and 8 members of a family, and none of them have actually lived in Canada,
Mm.
and they don't really plan to until maybe something, all hell
Yeah.
breaks loose and they
Right.
decide to
Right.
move,
Yeah.
then and they have a baby in the US before they actually spend those 3 years, they will not be
Mm.
able to pass it down.
That's very important. I mean, it goes back to what you
Yeah.
were saying earlier, right? There has to be some tie to the actual
Yes.
country that you're claiming citizenship from.
Yeah, we don't want to just give it, to everybody without any sign of commitment
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
that they're contributing or they're paying taxes in the future or whatever. There has to be that sense that they are actually wanting to be Canadians, not just getting it as a just in case and then
Right.
passing it on for generations to come. So this period right now, this is why everybody's doing what they're doing, because after this, it will be different again, which means if you have a child after December 2025, you will not just automatically be able to claim it any
Yeah.
longer. All the
Yeah.
way back to when Canada was created in 1867. You will have to make a conscious decision if you want to be a citizen to spend 3 years physically in Canada first
Yeah.
before you're able to do that.
Yeah.
And then there are different rules as well, even for like kids that are adopted. Like I've adopted children back in the day. The process was either you went through the process of citizenship direct or
Yeah.
permanent residence and then citizenship. And it was really
Right.
just based on timing. I made the
Yeah.
decision based on which was the fastest way to
Mhm.
get what I needed. And back then it was PR to citizenship. Now I think it's citizenship is faster. So people need to look because there used to be rules around if your child was adopted, there were limitations on certain things around
Mm.
naturalization.
Yeah.
Things have also changed.
Right.
So definitely important to reach out and speak to me before you assume that the law is the same. And if
Yeah.
ChatGPT or
Yeah.
whatever you're relying on is giving you legal advice, you could be making significant mistakes and errors that will impact your ability to pass citizenship down to your child.
Yeah.
So I always say, go to the source, look at the
Right.
law, talk to professionals like
Yeah.
Sumaiya and myself to make sure you're doing it right before you make a decision that could impact you in a very negative way.
Yeah, I mean, the laws are very complex. And I mean,
Yeah.
we're kind of segueing into the next slide. Another important thing that you mentioned, just like in Canada, in the US, if your child, I mean, under the current law, which is being contested right now, if your child is born here, it doesn't mean you automatically become a US citizen. And a common misconception people have is sometimes people come, without a visa, they come through the border and they think that my child, was born here, they're going to, get older, then they will petition for me, and then I can get a green card or become a citizen long term. But actually, it's not that simple. You could have a U.S. citizen child, and they could go through the first step of petitioning for you, but because of the way that you entered, it could bar you from getting a green card. And a lot
Wow.
of people don't realize that, so they're waiting around years for their child to reach a particular age. They realize that the child can petition for them, but they're going to get stuck at that second phase. So citizenship laws are complex, and there are all these different scenarios that come into play. And I think
Yes.
like, this is where, going back to, this slide, common mistakes like do not assume automatic citizenship. There are pathways that you have to follow. There are rules that you have to follow. And the earlier that you consult with an attorney, you can kind of prepare for the future, right? On what requirements you need to meet, whether you need to physically stay in Canada or the US, what documents you have to get, so that later you're not blindsided with, oh, these are the actual regulations and I didn't know.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
the thing. I feel so bad when people make a mistake and it affects them, and we can't do anything,
Right.
because they've made a decision that wasn't working for them at all. I was going to ask you about, before we get into dual citizenship, what about this draft business?
Yeah.
Is anything happening with that that
Yeah,
you
so
know?
there's conversation about this, right? So well, this is kind of in the works, and
Yeah.
I think that there's nothing concrete regarding this.
Okay.
But we are thinking about changing the laws to make it mandatory. They're expanding the age, right, for which people have to register for selective service and participate in the army.
Yeah.
And part of this stems from current events and things that are going on.
Yes.
So something that's very important about immigration law is that it's shaped by current policies. Our administration is, I mean, in the United States, is really defined by the administrations and objectives of the administration. This is something that's now, the conversation just started in the last
Okay.
weeks. We don't have anything concrete about it, but we see this not just in the United States. I mean, other countries are also engaging with this. Countries in the Europe are also
Yes.
engaging with this, the requirements for people having to register and do mandatory service
Military
in the army.
service. Yeah.
Yeah, military service. So there is nothing concrete at the
Okay.
moment. This is being discussed, but this is certainly a conversation to follow. The other thing that's important that I want to emphasize about US immigration law, in the last year to now, so many things have been changing. The requirements for a lot of things have been changing. And this conversation that we have about US birthright, this case in the Supreme Court, it is a very, very important case because it doesn't just go to who can become a US citizen. It's also defining, what makes somebody a US citizen. Part of the 14th Amendment definition was jurisdiction, right? Like you were born here, that's what it is. But now we're saying that even if you're born here, jurisdiction doesn't apply. And then this opens up the door to other things and other interpretations of other amendments that we have.
Yes.
And citizenship law, it didn't come into play overnight in the United States. There are several cases and important cases that had to be argued to really cement that regardless of your parents, your race, religion, etc., if you were just born here, be a US citizen. And now it's really questioning all of those things.
Amazing. It's
Yeah.
one thing I do love about immigration, it is fluid and it's changing all the time. So we're never bored. And for me, after 25 years, I've seen more changes in the last year and a half in Canada with immigration law
Yeah.
than ever. So it's the new norm, I always say,
Yeah.
is constant change, constant change.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for people that don't do this work like you and I do every day to
Yeah.
understand the level and volume of changes that are occurring.
Mhm.
And so there's no way that anybody, and we work so hard to keep up to date every day.
Yeah, yeah.
So, because it
Yeah.
changes every day. There's always
Right,
a
right.
change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the other thing too is, Evelyn, I don't know if it's the case in Canada, for us, like there are a lot of things that are kind of up in the air and it's not concrete, but
Yes.
then it creates so much uncertainty and people aren't sure, like, is it something that's definitely happening or not? And there's still a process that needs to be followed. So this is
Mhm.
why it's like, it's hard to give concrete information sometimes
Yeah.
unless an update has actually happened or something is being implemented. And
Yeah.
even then, a lawsuit could be in the works, right?
Yeah.
Challenge that, challenging the constitutionality of that. So I think what I would recommend to everyone is keep an eye out for all the things that are being discussed or being put forward, whether it's through an executive order or whatnot, but you have to wait to see how it actually plays out and comes into play.
And that's why you
Yeah,
provide
yeah,
advice as a
yeah,
professional,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So let's
So,
talk
yeah,
about
perfect.
dual citizenship. People always ask me about this, as I was mentioning before. If you get a US passport and you have a Canadian passport, what happens? Are you able to do it, or are you able to have 5 passports?
Yeah,
And at least on the Canadian side, I can speak to the fact that, yes, you can have as many passports as you want.
yeah,
But the way that we recommend people operate is you enter Canada with the passport that is the Canadian passport if you have it. You don't come in with the US or Panama or Portuguese or whatever. Whatever you have that is the citizenship that you're coming into Canada with, use that passport because you're entering as a Canadian citizen.
right.
Canada doesn't care how many other passports you carry. It's not so much that there's this dual citizenship. It's basically you can have as many as you want. But it doesn't take away from the fact that you have the Canadian one. You use that to come into Canada. And then, of course, you've got all the obligations that come along with it, which is, if you're entering, making sure you have a valid passport, you're renewing your passport, you're paying your taxes. If you're into Canada, if you're out of Canada, you may still have tax obligations. And I always tell people, I don't give any tax advice. I always
Yeah.
refer people to tax specialists that understand the cross-border elements that they need to meet for any of their tax obligations. So what about you,
Yeah.
Sumaiya, and dual
Mhm.
citizenship?
Yeah, so the US also recognizes dual citizenship. So this is great. It allows people to have, multiple citizenships. And again, they can use, a different passport to enter a different country if they happen to be a citizen of that country. One of the important things is there are other countries that don't allow for dual citizenship. And this is
Yes.
something that comes up often with some of our clients, for example, like China.
Mhm.
So a lot of our clients, they hesitate in applying for US citizenship because it could mean that they're losing another important citizenship that they want to keep. So even though the US allows for dual citizenship, sometimes it is a consideration that the other country that they're a citizen of may limit their ability to have more than one passport. And so
Mhm.
this does sometimes prevent people from applying for citizenship. So there are situations when people don't want to become US citizens. And then the other one is tax obligations. And this comes up often. A lot of times, people live in more than one country and they work in more than one country. And so there are important tax considerations. If you're a US citizen, it doesn't matter where you are. You could be outside of the United States for 3 years. You
Mhm.
still need to pay your taxes. Even if you're not working, you still need to be compliant with US tax law and file your tax returns. So this is something very important. And there are foreign tax obligations and laws that we don't advise on either, right? So this is where you have to go to a specialist of each respective country and make sure you're abiding with the laws of that state. So I think, Evelyn, just to kind of like segue into our next slide, I
Mhm.
think we're talking about practical guidance, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we kind of touched on a couple of these things. So I think the first thing is that should be very clear to everyone is that US law and Canadian law is complex. So here's some important things that you should do. You have to keep detailed records of everything, your travels, where you're living, your birth certificates, your ties to these family members that you're going to claim citizenship from. And then, Evelyn, I'll hand
Yes.
over to you to go over the other tips.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a lot of people forget to even register their child when
Yeah,
their child is born. And this is something that as soon as I hear somebody's going to have a baby, I'm like, oh, I'm so happy for you. Make sure you register the child if they're born in the States or they're
yeah,
born in Canada and they're from another country. So important to do. And sometimes just the blur of having a new baby and all of that, you forget. And then you find out that, oh my God, it's the kid is 10 years old and I haven't registered their birth. And it might make it more complicated for you at that time to get them what you need. So please always think about that, is that if you're entitled to get your child citizenship, register it and make sure that your consulate knows you've had a child abroad. And don't assume eligibility. Many people think, oh, I'll do it later because I know already that we're eligible. You may not be eligible, and
yeah,
that child may not be able to be considered a citizen if you haven't done all the things you need to do. So it's
right.
so important that you do everything right. And that's why I always say, speak to an immigration professional, call a lawyer to make sure that you have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. If you have any cross-border family ties, you need to know. Oftentimes we have clients who might have a citizen, let's say Canadian citizen wife, and then there'll be the husband or the partner is a permanent resident, but not a citizen, but that one is a US citizen. And all the children are Canadian citizens because they've registered them. That one person that's different in the family. And I always say you need to think about this because this will affect you for travel. It'll affect you when you want to come back to Canada. That one is not necessarily even a citizen or has status. And you need to start planning ahead to maybe sponsor that spouse so that everybody has the same passport and the same citizenship, because
Yeah.
otherwise it makes traveling around the world very challenging if you're not all looking the same. That could be that one that needs the visa and nobody
Right,
else
right.
needs the visa
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you're in a different line and
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
see you later, spouse,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so just something to think about.
Right, right. Yeah, and just along those lines, right? If you're eligible for citizenship, you've had for us, if you've had, I see people come to me with like green cards that they've had for like 20
Oh
years,
my
speak
God.
perfect English and everything. Like, what's going on? Or they come with me with the very, very old green card. I'm like, why haven't you applied for citizenship? So I think that if you're eligible for citizenship, unless there's something very important keeping you from applying for it,
Yeah,
you should certainly apply for US citizenship.
yeah,
And there are important obligations and rights that you have as a US citizen and also benefits, right?
yeah,
That are important for you to consider. You have to pay your taxes. You can vote. That's a benefit.
yes,
So these are things to look at. And what I would really say is citizenship is complicated and you don't know if you're going to be eligible for citizenship. So if you have any questions, even if it may seem as simple as that you just complete the form, speak with an attorney just to
yeah.
make sure. Because for us, we have a certificate of naturalization and then we have certificate of citizenship. These are
Mm-hmm.
two different things and you may not know which to apply. And
Yes.
just a story, Evelyn, I had somebody come to me and he had US passports for his kids. And he's like, I have to apply for a certificate of citizenship. My wife insists that I have to apply for it because I need my kids to be US citizens. And I just looked at him and said, but you have US passports in your hand. Why do you need to apply? And he didn't understand that that
Mhm.
certificate was just proof of them being US citizens, but he didn't need that. He
You
had
didn't
the
need that. Hit the passports. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Canada has the same. We've got a
yeah,
lot of times people, what we're doing now for the people I was telling you that are now trying to claim Canadian citizenship is
yeah.
applying for a grant of citizenship, which is
Mhm.
basically some document that shows that you are
Yeah,
entitled to citizenship. And then you use that to get your passport. So you have to first be deemed to have the grant of citizenship as
yeah,
opposed to applying for a citizenship certificate, which is normally that comes by way of a spouse or it comes by way of birth or comes by way of other naturalization. So there's different ways, and very often people make the mistake. And I always say what we do is not just form filling. It
right, right.
is complicated.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
analysis. It is looking at years and dates and generational laws and case law to make sure you're applying for the right thing. Because what I hate is when somebody does something and they
yeah,
don't seek out advice and then
right.
they make huge mistakes.
Yeah.
And then they come to us after, and we have to try to fix the mistake. And that is the thing that causes me, more work, and it's actually harder to get them the goal if they've already messed it up the first time, right? You must see that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that I really what I would like to close away with for us on the US side is right now, if you had a complicated history in how you got your green card and you're applying for citizenship, you should absolutely not step into that interview without going over your history with a immigration attorney. The other trend that is happening right now is denaturalization. So under the new administration, as of last December, now they are trying to meet an objective of trying to get 100 to 200 cases per month of denaturalizing people. And I would say, I think for like the past 20 years or something, they would have like an average of like 20 cases or something per year. I don't think that's the accurate number, but just to kind of give you an idea for reference, right? So right now, when there's a concerted effort to denaturalize people, and then also like
what does that mean? Denaturalize, mean take away their citizenship?
Strip you of your citizenship, and then you will still have your green card, but then they can put you in proceedings to get rid of your, take away also your permanent residence. And this can be triggered by your criminal history or any fraud that you committed in obtaining your green card. But right now, if you answer something incorrectly during your interview, you don't understand English, and you say yes to an answer that should be a no, you could be placing yourself in a scenario that really makes things complicated. So it's worth to go over something with a professional just to make sure that you're on the same side than to risk it. And yeah, everything is in the record, right? So you can't just come back later and have new information. You have to address what was there in the past.
Well, oh my goodness, this has been so informative for me too. I have to say,
Sumaiya,
even though I know you're the expert and we came up with this idea together, and what a wonderful topic, because there's so many nuances in it, and the more we talk, the more I'm like, oh my God, what about this? What about that? What about this?
I know.
But we do need to wrap it up. And I just want to thank you so much for joining me and co-hosting this with me. I'm really grateful for your expertise and your knowledge and your passion for immigration law, clearly. And I hope that those that watch the webinar and will watch the repeats and the reruns over and over, it's going to be all on all of our socials for Khalique Law and Ackah Business Immigration Law. Then you please reach out and contact us with all your specific questions. We'd love this opportunity to meet with you. Thank you so much. Till next time.
This is great. All right, take care and enjoy.